Hi, I'm Marley Benefiel, and I'm on staff at Parents Helping Parents. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for this webinar that Parents Helping Parents is doing in coordination with Morrissey Compton Educational Center in Redwood City. We love partnering with them because we are both nonprofits who have a common mission to help families affected by learning differences and/or ADHD. Our topic today is helping your youth or teen with anxiety during unprecedented times. I'm joined by Dr. Laura Chyou. She's a staff psychologist at Morrissey Compton. A central focus of Dr. Chyou's clinical work is centered around understanding best practices in providing mental health services to underserved individuals, families, and communities. She's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then she will answer questions. You'll be able to submit your questions via a Q&A on the Zoom toolbar for her to answer at the end. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chyou. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thank you, Marley, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here today to have this opportunity to talk with you all. Just to give you a little bit of background, as Marley said, I'm a staff psychologist at Morrissey Compton, and I work with children and teens providing individual and group therapy, as well as psychoeducational assessment and consultation. To give you a little bit of background about Morrissey Compton, we are a nonprofit organization in Redwood City, and we've been in operation for over 35 years. We provide a variety of services to the community, including educational therapy, tutoring, and executive function coaching, as well as psychological services, including individual, group, and family therapy, and consultation for professionals in the community, as well as teachers and other community-based organizations. And then we also do psychoeducational assessments. So we're kind of a one-stop shop to get a lot of educational and mental health services. And if you have any questions, I'll be providing information at the end, and you can feel free to reach out to us at any point and talk with somebody about what you might need. So without further ado, we can go ahead and get started with our topic today. We'll be looking at how you can help your teen manage stress and anxiety during these unpredictable times, in particular, the situation that we're in right now. As Marley said, please write down or keep in mind questions that you have, and I'll be saving a chunk of time at the end to go over that and hopefully be able to provide any answers that would be helpful for you. So just to outline some of my goals for today, we'll start with a brief overview of anxiety. What does anxiety look like? Some common symptoms, and give you a chance to think about what anxiety looks like for your specific teen, because we know that it looks different for everyone. So think about the response tendencies that you see in your child when they're feeling stressed or anxious. We'll also then review some evidence-based strategies to help your teen cope with worry and stress. We'll talk about some special considerations for this particularly unique situation that we're all in right now. And as I said, we'll end with some open discussion and questions and provide some additional resources at the end in case you need to reach out for help. So just to give us a brief overview of anxiety, a definition that I've come across that I really like is thinking about anxiety as the mind and body's reaction to stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar situations. So really, it captures this sense of uneasiness and distress and just dread that you might feel before a significant event or during a stressful event. Again, not much unlike the situation that we're in right now. Although anxiety is an expected part of life, something that we're all going to experience, and it can be helpful at times. If we think about it, it keeps us alert, makes us more attentive to our surroundings and a situation, allows us to be aware of what's happening in the world, And then all of those things promote preparedness, right? Help us to do the things that we need to do to get our work done, to get through a challenging task or situation. So anxiety can be good, and we don't want to get rid of it altogether. That being said, too much anxiety is really harmful, and can get in the way not only of us feeling good, but also of us being able to get through our day and function in a productive way. So, a couple things to know when we think about anxiety and our young people and adolescents, it's really important to recognize that anxiety is the most prevalent mental health concern that we're seeing with adolescents today. The estimated prevalence is about 31%, which is a pretty big chunk of our youth experiencing anxious symptoms. And it's important to also know that anxiety is often comorbid or co-occurs with other disorders, things like depression, ADHD, and learning difficulties. So we'll often see our youth facing a combination of these things. Also, a little bit frustrating and difficult is that anxiety, although it's so prevalent, it's also very undertreated among our teenagers. So only about 18%, a little over half of youth experiencing anxiety actually receive treatment or some kind of professional help. So we know that there are a great deal of teenagers out there who are experiencing symptoms of anxiety, but are not able to get relief through counseling or other types of treatment that are available. So hopefully today I can help you all learn some strategies that you can use at home when you notice that your teen is feeling anxious or worried, and try to help them work with that. A couple slides back, I mentioned that our goal today, and really all the time, is not to eliminate anxiety entirely. That would lead us all to be pretty unproductive and not really be able to get through our day. So when we think about anxiety, I like this chart because it does a really nice job illustrating sort of where we want to be with our anxious and worried thoughts. If we have absolutely no anxiety, we're completely understimulated, then we're really going to be in this place of feeling pretty bored and possibly depressed. As we start to increase the level of stress that we're facing, little by little, our attention increases. That's really when we start to become interested in a task. It's a little bit challenging. And then we creep up to that optimal level of performance right in the middle of that bell curve that you're seeing on your screen. And it's there that people experience their best functioning, what we call sort of flow. They're stimulated, they're attentive, they're interested. They have a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress sort of driving that, but not anything to the point where it's taking away from the work that they're able to do. Now, if the stress continues to increase or remains present for a more prolonged period of time, that's when we start to see real anxious symptoms develop. And you can see as you're going down the other side of that bell curve, we start to see anxiety become present. And again, if the symptoms persist and the stress stays present, then eventually we could see some pretty significant impairment in functioning. So what we're going to be talking about today is really that right side of the curve, where we're starting to see the anxiety tip over to be an unhealthy level. So let's take a minute to think about what anxiety looks like. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many of these symptoms. Perhaps you've experienced them yourself or observed them in other people. There are a wide variety of symptoms that people experience when they're experiencing anxiety. And no two people look exactly alike when they're stressed or anxious. So these are common symptoms, and I'll walk through them. But it's important to keep in mind that in order to be experiencing anxiety, you don't need to have all of these symptoms. And you may have some that aren't even on this chart. So keep that in mind. A couple of the symptoms that are highlighted here. So overthinking, ruminating about something, very classically avoidance. So if something makes you feel worried or anxious, you choose to stay away from it and avoid it at all costs. Physical symptoms, things like sweating, sweaty palms, stomach issues. You can think of stomach aches or having difficulty going to the bathroom. Some people experience full-on panic attacks. So this is sort of a sudden rush of physical symptoms. Your heart is racing. You feel like you can't catch your breath. You might feel nauseous and lightheaded. And that tends to, last anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes and then slowly dissipate. But it's a really terrifying experience. And people often describe feeling like, oh my God, I thought I was dying. There was something really wrong. So not everyone who experiences anxiety experiences panic attacks, but that's certainly a common symptom that people can feel. Oftentimes, children and teens experiencing anxiety need a lot of reassurance. They need a lot of support around things that they're doing. Am I doing this right? Is this okay? They often also experience a lack of patience. What we might think of is irritability. So they're kind of always on edge and snappy. Procrastination is another really common symptom that we see, particularly in adolescents. It's just difficult for them to get things done when they're feeling worried or anxious. Going along with that, trouble concentrating, so getting easily distracted, not being able to get through their work. Constant worrying, that's a pretty typical one. I think when we think of anxiety, we think somebody's worrying all the time, and that can be true in many cases, but doesn't have to be that way. There are plenty of people who experience anxiety without this overwhelming sense of worry that they're able to describe. Trouble breathing, as I mentioned, that can be part of a panic attack. That can also just be part of feeling anxious or stressed. Headaches are common. Rapid heartbeat, as I mentioned. Insomnia is a big one. So having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or just generally feeling like you're not getting restful sleep. We see that a lot with children and teens as well. And then lastly, memory issues. So having a hard time remembering what you were doing or remembering facts if you're thinking about school or projects from work. As I said, these are sort of an overview of common symptoms. There may be more. We know that experience of anxiety varies not only across gender and age, but also across racial backgrounds. Different cultures experience anxiety in different ways. So let's take a minute and just have you think, what does anxiety look like for your teen? When your child or adolescent is feeling worried or stressed, what things do you notice about their behavior or about their mood? What shifts? And you can think about this in your head if you want to write it down, but I just want you to take a minute to kind of think about what this looks like for your teen. Okay. So now that we all have an idea of what anxiety looks like, and we've taken some time to think about what it looks like for our child or teen in particular, we're going to go ahead and move into thinking about some strategies for managing anxiety. And I think a place to start that's really useful is thinking about the body. As we talked about, there are many physical symptoms associated with anxiety. And we know that anxiety is not just a mental state, it's also a physiological reaction that's happening in our brain, leading to this variety of symptoms. So when we're faced with anxiety, our body is really mobilizing in a state of fear and defense. Sometimes we think about this as fight or flight. And it's really an evolutionary idea that it was important for us historically to be able to respond to danger or fearful things with an immediate response, being able to run away, for example, or defend ourselves. Although that can still be relevant sometimes today, it's also important to recognize that we don't need this full body reaction every time we're faced with some level of stress or concern. So I think it's really important to recognize that these physical symptoms are not only symptoms of anxiety, but they also maintain that anxious state through the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. So while we're experiencing anxious symptoms, an important reason to help bring them back down to baseline is that not only do we feel uncomfortable, but if we let them linger, we're sort of prolonging that physical response. So the reason I like to start with the body is because if we bring those physical symptoms back down to baseline, then we can experience relief of that emotion around anxiety. So how do we do this? How do we bring our body back down to baseline? Really, it all kind of centers around the idea of breathing. We know that with breathing, we can trigger what's called a relaxation response, which essentially allows us to slow down our heart rate, lower our blood pressure, and pace our breathing to our sort of normal level. There are a variety of ways to do this. You can think about, just generally slowing your exhalation. That's the most important part. Taking a long time to sort of let the air out. If you're sucking your air in really quickly, it's going to have the opposite effect and be triggering more of a hyperventilation. So really focus on slowing that exhalation or helping your team to slow that exhalation. This can be done through things like counting. Sometimes people will like to say count in on their breathing to a count of 3, pause, exhale to a count of 4. Other times people like to inhale to a phrase and exhale to another phrase. You'll hear a lot about diaphragmatic breathing. So the idea of really trying to deepen your breath so that you're not doing the shallow breathing that's focused here in your chest, but really sort of breathing deeply into that belly. For other people, the idea of counting or belly breathing feels frustrating and confusing. And so they'll just focus on their breath. That if we take the time to just notice how we're breathing, we can usually then slow it down, even without counting or going through some kind of exercise or routine. Some people like humming or singing, or if you're speaking, simply adding words in between breaths can actually slow down that breathing. As I said, there's no single technique that works for everyone. And so it's really important to encourage our young people, and I do this a lot in my therapy sessions, play around with it. Find what works for you. Learn how to notice your breathing and try to slow it down in whatever way feels most comfortable to you. And it will probably take some time to figure that out. So once we've worked on developing a skill to kind of slow down our breathing and relax some of those physical symptoms, we can hopefully be in a space where we're able to think about why we're anxious and what we can do to reduce that anxiety. So one thing that we know is that if we overestimate a particular danger, our anxiety is going to increase. So for example, let's say your child took a test and they feel like they did poorly on that test. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I failed the test. Now I'm going to fail the class and I'm not going to graduate high school. Clearly in this situation, they're probably overestimating the impact of that one poor performance on a test. So you want to work with them to recognize that. Another example might be, particularly relevant today. Perhaps they hear a scary statistic or, comments from friends about people getting really sick. And they're worried, oh my gosh, if I get sick, I'm going to be in the hospital. So walk them through accurately assessing the situation. Collect facts. So that might be through, reading through trusted sources, or in the school example, talking to their teacher, looking at their other grades, examining sort of what are the facts of the situation. I think when it comes to reading information or watching the news, I'll put the caution out there, make sure it's age appropriate and in small doses, and make sure it's from a source that you feel is accurate, that you can trust. Then go through with them and talk about the evidence. So with the school example, okay, so you did get a bad grade on this test, but look, you got B's and A's on all the other tests this semester. When we think about how that's all going to add together, is that really going to leave you with an F in the class? And once you've gone through all of the facts and evidence to support that thinking, help your teen go back and check that worry, and then come up with an alternative thought that they can replace that more anxious thought with. So, for example, with the school, maybe the alternative thought is something like, I did really poorly on this test, but I've done really well on all the other exams this semester, so I know my grade is going to be okay. Right? They're acknowledging that, yes, there was this bad event, this challenging test, and they're also recognizing that there were many other tests this semester in which they've done well, and so their feared outcome is unlikely to occur. Another important piece in recognizing how we experience anxiety is that we also, if we underestimate our ability to cope, anxiety will increase. So it's not only about overestimating danger, but also, really importantly, underestimating our ability to deal with a challenging situation. So in order to tackle that piece, we really need to focus on building coping skills. And to start that, we need to ask ourselves and ask our teen, okay, what is making you anxious? And be really specific, because we can't think about the most appropriate coping skills until we know what kind of anxiety they're experiencing. So once you've figured that out, moving on to, okay, well, let's think about this together. What can we do to help you feel okay, to increase your feeling of safety and security in spite of the fact that we're in this difficult situation? So taking a current example, perhaps your teen is worried about whether or not you have enough food at home while we're on our social distancing and quarantine at home. So you can very much take a look and see, okay, how much food do we have? Is it enough? What are we doing to make sure that we keep our food supply up? We're going to the store once a week, or we're ordering groceries online, or we have a whole pantry in the garage that's stocked with food. Whatever the case may be, helping them to figure out, okay, we have planned, we have prepared, we're going to be okay. Other coping tools might be they know that they can use their breathing to manage anxiety. Or, for example, if they're worried about a test, they can study and review their notes and talk with their teacher. All of these things are ways for them to cope or manage that anxiety so that it goes down. Another strategy that's really important when we're managing anxiety is learning how to shift our perspective. So oftentimes we'll notice that when people are feeling, when people are feeling anxious, they're either really focused on the future and worrying about something that hasn't happened yet but may happen, or they're really ruminating about something that happened in the past. Oh my gosh, I said this to my friend and I wonder how they're feeling about it. And they're so worried about the ramifications of some past behavior. So a saying that I really like that I heard in a training a couple months back was, what we feed grows. So if we're feeding into the thoughts about the future or feeding into our worries about the past, they're just going to get bigger. And the most important thing we can do is really try to stay present and feed that non-anxious, sort of healthy state of mind. The more we do to work in that direction, the bigger that sensation is going to get. That sense of calm will grow instead of having the anxiety grow. So how do we nurture this non-anxious state of mind? There are a few different steps that people take. One is sort of, again, orienting yourself toward this present focus. So things like meditation, breathing exercises, Grounding exercises. An example of grounding would be something like if your teen is feeling really anxious, having them take a few minutes to just focus on what's going on around them. Name 5 things that they see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. And by doing that, they're focusing on the present. And if they're thinking of all those things, they can't possibly also be thinking about whatever they were worried about in the future or the past. So that's a grounding exercise. Another important exercise is visualization or guided imagery. I like to call this find your beach. Find your place that's calming. When the kids that I work with in therapy, I'll often ask them, okay, what's your favorite place? Sometimes it's Disneyland, which might not be particularly calming for us as parents, but whatever it is for your child or teenager, it might be going on a hike or being in their room, whatever their favorite calming place is, and then having them really just close their eyes and think about everything that's in that place. What does that place look like? What does that place smell like? What things do they hear in that place? What are some of their favorite things that they like to touch or sensations that happen in that place? And again, by really in having them engross themselves in thinking about this calming image or calming place, then it's going to make it impossible for them to simultaneously be thinking about whatever it is that they were feeling worried or anxious about. So that's one set of strategies for nurturing that non-anxious mind. Another thing is to find a way to express that feeling. So if your teen is feeling really anxious and they enjoy doing art or journaling, having them work on some art, write a story, do some journaling, find a way to express the feeling and let it out, what's happening inside for them. This could also be through things like exercise, going for a walk or a run, or doing 10 jumping jacks, listening to music, or really engaging themselves fully in any kind of hobby or preferred enjoyable activity. Again, we're shifting our mind. We're not feeding the anxiety. We're feeding a calm sense of being. The last two, one, observe, reflect, and accept, and developing healthy lifestyle habits. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in the next 2 slides. So what do I mean by observe, reflect, and accept? Sometimes it's okay to feel anxious. As we talked about in the beginning, this is something we're all going to experience many, many times across our lifespan, and it's a normal part of life, especially in the context of scary things. So when something scary or unpredictable is happening, when we feel like we've lost our sense of control, anxiety is a normal response to that. And it's even necessary, again, to help us be prepared and respond appropriately. So make space for your child or teen to feel anxious. Give them permission to be scared. It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too. It's okay to feel worried. I feel worried too. Don't focus so much on making it go away completely, because that can actually sometimes create more anxiety. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious. I have to get rid of the anxiety. And now I feel more anxious about that. So really just letting your child or your teen know that, you know what, it's okay. I get it. There are scary things happening right now, and it's normal to feel worried or anxious about it. Listen to them talk about whatever they're afraid of or worried about. Sort of walk with them through that experience. Just listen actively without judging, without trying to negate what they're saying or talk them out of it, but really just hearing them and letting them process how they're feeling and kind of get out what's been probably churning for them in their mind. Providing validation. So again, validating that, yeah, it's normal to feel anxious right now, and that is really difficult, or that is scary, and just helping them to feel like it's okay to be anxious. Sharing your own worries and how you're dealing with them. I'd put a word of caution here. If you're feeling particularly anxious yourself, we don't want to sort of cross over into like dumping anxiety on our teens. But I think the experience of joining them and letting them know that you feel worried too is okay in moderation. And then, really embracing the process. So this is that accept part. Thinking about with your teen, okay, so there are some bad things that are resulting from this situation. What good might come from it? Are there opportunities here in working through this for courage, for growth, to change? Thinking about the current situation right now, maybe one sort of upside is we're all at home and we're spending more time together, which on the one hand can be challenging, but on the other hand, maybe allows us to slow down in a way that we hadn't before. When, for example, a teen gets a bad grade and they're worried about their performance on a test, it's an opportunity for growth to recognize, oh, maybe I need to change my study habits a little bit, or maybe going to office hours with my teacher after school actually is a good idea. Or maybe I studied too much and I got so stressed out that I need to take a step back. So finding opportunities within that difficult situation to make changes, to learn about ourselves, and to work in a progressive direction. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies for a healthy lifestyle. So we know that anxiety is always going to be something that can happen and will happen throughout our lifespan. So one way to also help us manage it is to really prepare ourselves in advance for kind of creating a space and within our body and within our surroundings that allows us to minimize our experience of anxiety and cope most effectively when it occurs. So there are a few things we can do to work with that. First, diet is really important. So although I know it's hard in general and probably even harder right now, encouraging our young people to eat well-balanced and nutritious meals, really taking this on as a family and setting that goal, avoiding things like caffeine, sugar, greasy, processed foods, and really other substances. So you can think about alcohol and drugs. Really, none of that is going to help an anxious mind. In particular, things like caffeine, that it increases heart rate. So that can often make anxiety worse, as can things like sugar. So really just trying to think about what we're putting in our body, and is that helping us to sort of feed the calm, or is it most likely adding to our anxiety? Exercise is another really important part of daily life that can help control anxiety. So encouraging teens to be active and really supporting their engagement in any physical activities that they enjoy. So whether that's sports, whether it's dance, whether it's gymnastics, whether it's going for a walk or a hike, lifting weights, whatever they enjoy, even if it's just dancing in their room, that's great. Anything to keep their body moving. I know, again, in the current situation, a lot of extracurricular activities and clubs and ways that maybe they used to be active aren't available right now. So really kind of looking at the resources that are available online. I know that there are tons of free online classes for things like exercise, Zumba, yoga, dance, stretching, kickboxing, really, you name it, there's probably a video on YouTube for it. So that's one option of getting exercise while at home. And also, going for walks, obviously abiding by our social distancing regulations, but getting out of the house and going for that walk or going for that jog or playing in the backyard, kicking a ball around. Again, any way to sort of get your teen physically active can help with anxiety. Sleep is another really important lifestyle habit that we know impacts anxiety. So all of us need regular, prolonged periods of sleep. For our teens, we're really hoping for them to be getting, 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, uninterrupted. So finding ways to really encourage healthy sleep and a good sleep routine is going to be important. So making sure they're going to bed at a reasonable time, not staying up all night looking at their phone or computer or watching TV, and really allowing them to sleep, especially now, maybe a little longer than they did in the morning, since school may or may not have a set time. But the more we sleep, the better our body is able to cope with the stress that we face and really decrease any anxiety that might be present. And then lastly, supporting engagement and healthy relationships. This is a particular interest of mine. I did a lot of research on this in the past, and it's overwhelmingly clear that for children, adolescents, adults, for all of us, human beings, we're social beings. So we need that engagement with other people to maintain a healthy state of mind. And in particular, when we're feeling anxious, reaching out and getting that social support is a critical way to combat our anxiety. Again, I realize that in this particular time, social engagement kind of takes on a new meaning, and we have to be a little bit more creative about how we engage with our friends and family. But there are plenty of opportunities, whether it's via Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, engaging in social media in a healthy way, online gaming, scheduling online play dates or dance parties or baking or you name it, but finding a way for our young people to still be able to interact with one another from a distance is really critical in helping them keep that anxiety and stress to a manageable level. Again, recognizing that we're sort of in an interesting time right now, I've included a few additional strategies for reducing anxiety while we're all at home. A couple things. One, trying to maintain some kind of a daily routine. I'm sure you've heard this a lot lately, but going to bed and waking up around the same time every day, setting specific times for things like work and school and meals, being sure to schedule time for fun, for preferred activities. And again, this is preferred for your teen, right? So what do they like to do? What kind of activities bring them joy and calm, and really making sure that we're allotting time for that every day. And like I said on the last side, really planning opportunities for social engagement. So planning that Skype date or that FaceTime. If you regularly limit your child's access to things like social media or, their phone, making sure that they do have those opportunities, since that is sort of the unique way that we're able to connect right now. Maybe giving them some amount of time every day to be able to do that so that they can build those social relationships or maintain them still. Another really important piece, I think, for parents is being available, particularly for children and teens when they're feeling anxious or stressed or worried. They might need sort of more of that reassurance, more opportunities to talk with you or be with you. And so I think being available is critical. I'll throw in the caveat though, being available but not hovering. So I know when we as parents get anxious, sometimes our tendency is to check in constantly or sort of emphasize, let's all be together, let's do this family time. And while I think that's helpful and important, it's also really important to recognize that we still are talking about teenagers and they're still going to want that independence and that time for themselves. So being available, but also recognizing their autonomy and giving them some space and freedom to the degree that it's possible while we're all at home. Another really important point as parents is that we need to really manage our own anxiety and model healthy coping. So if we're feeling really anxious, working hard to use some of the strategies that we've talked about today or other strategies that you've used in the past to keep your own anxiety level kind of in check so that it's not bleeding out into your relationship with your teenager and they're not really feeding off your anxiety. And I say that with full recognition of how difficult that is right now. It's certainly a challenge for all of us. Again, staying informed. So obviously there's information that we all need to know right now, but limiting that media intake and not making every family discussion something about, COVID-19 or what's happening right now. I just had a session with a young person a few days ago, and they were saying that that's become the topic of conversation in their house right now. And that's been really difficult for them because there's sort of nowhere to go to get away from it. So I think being mindful of what information we're taking in and trying to set limits for ourselves and for our kids around sort of how much exposure they're getting there. And then lastly, I think this goes without saying, but really trying to avoid shaming or dismissing our young people's concerns, even if they might feel overblown to us or, might seem like they ebb and flow and they're kind of coming out of left field and then they're fine and then coming back. But really when our young people are expressing their concerns and expressing their anxiety, trying to validate and, really be there for them without minimizing. So we'll leave time. I think we have, just about 20 minutes for your questions and answers. Before we do that, I did mention that the slides include our contact information. So you can see here, we have Morrissey Compton's information as well as Parents Helping Parents, our websites and phone numbers. And then Parents Helping Parents also has their mental health support services that are available right now, and the Santa Clara County Suicide Hotline. So please feel free to take advantage of any of these resources. And then lastly, I've included a few websites and other crisis line phone numbers that are available to you 24/7. If you feel like you'd like to read a little bit more about anxiety in teenagers and what you can do and symptoms, these are some really good resources. And if you find yourself in a difficult crisis situation, you can call one of these lines and they have people that you can talk with immediately and get some advice around next steps and what you can do.
Great.
So with that,
you know what? Yeah, terrific information. I learned several new things today, and I didn't know that was possible, but thank you. We are going to, this is a recorded session that we'll be putting in on the PHP and the Morrissey Compton websites. We will include a link to the slides so that you can get these resources there. So don't worry, you don't have to be madly scribbling. I'd love to know if anybody has any questions. I think everyone was so engrossed that I don't have questions actually at the moment. So in addition, I was going to say one of the things that we have started here at Parents Helping Parents just during this wacky last couple of weeks to keep the anxiety in check for parents and caregivers. We have a twice a week, I'm going to call it a therapy session, but we're calling it SOS, Saving Our Sanity. And it's a support group for parents and caregivers that is co-facilitated by a really terrific staff. Actually, she's not a staff, she's a volunteer facilitator for one of our support groups, as well as Laura Beth DeHorty, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. So she can, so the two of them are going to do two times a week, Monday evening and Wednesday at 1:30 groups, so that you can get online. You can find these on our website, on our event calendar, and you can join one of those meetings if you just want to connect with other parents and talk about what's going on in your life. The other thing that might be good for people who are looking for more resources, last week we recorded 2 webinars that might be of interest. One was Parenting in a Pandemic. That was with Dr. Damon Korb. He's a pediatrician, a behavioral developmental pediatrician, and he talks a lot about structure and keeping, your family routines in order, which Ashley also talked about on another Morrissey Compton that we did, another webinar we did with Morrissey Compton. And so you might want to check that out. And then there was Optimizing Your Home Environment for Online Learning, which was a webinar done with Serena Basho, who's staff at Morrissey Compton. And for those of you parents who are struggling with trying to figure out all of this, that might be a good one to just help you think through some strategies around that. You know what? There's a thank you from somebody to all of us. So that's great. Thank you. We appreciate that. That came through in the chat.
Somebody
asked you a question. Okay. Let's see. Are you offering teletherapy for clients?
Yes. So myself and the other psychologists at Morrissey Compton are offering teletherapy for clients. Right now, my schedule is full, but you could certainly call our main number that's included in one of those final slides and talk with our intake coordinator. And we have several other psychologists who are also offering teletherapy, and one of them may have availability. So certainly reach out, and we'd be happy to try to fit you in.
Does Morrissey Compton accept Medi-Cal as a follow-up question?
So Morrissey Compton, we don't take insurance, but we do offer scholarships for all of our services. So families can fill out a financial aid application, which is available online. And then it's reviewed by our director and our board, and scholarships are handed out based on need. So that is one way of accessing services, obviously without incurring the cost, as they can be pretty expensive.
Great. The PHP website also has a really great community resource directory, which you can go in and look for resources, including therapists who deal with anything in the disability community. So that's another resource you might want to check. Let's see. I've got a question from. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something else?
Oh, I was just going to say I saw one other question, but it looks like you saw
There's
two.
one other. Is self-regulation the same as mindfulness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say they're a bit different. Self-regulation is really can capture a lot of different things. So whether you're regulating emotions or regulating behavior, it can span a wide variety of things and kind of falls under the category of what we would think about as an executive function. Mindfulness is really an idea of being in the present and being aware of sort of what's happening immediately for you. So while mindfulness does involve some level of self-regulation because you're purposely directing your attention toward the present when we're being mindful. So if you were doing mindfulness of breathing, you'd be focusing your attention on your breath, which is in a way self-regulation. Or if you were doing mindfulness of what's going on in your surroundings, right? You'd be sort of regulating your attention to focus on what you're hearing or what you're seeing. So while they overlap, I would say that they are really distinct activities as well.
Great. You mentioned that self-regulation is somehow a part of executive functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we are going to do on April 30th another webinar with Morrissey Compton, a different one of another staff psychologist will be presenting specifically on executive function, if that's of interest to anybody. So that's April 30th, I think at noon.
Great.
And it's on the PHP website. Okay. Anything else? I think we're good. All right. Thank you, Laura. This was a super great, helpful, timely topic for everybody. So thank you. And I'm going to end the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you
Bye.
all.